Tonight I want to share something that, once you truly grasp it, doesn't just shift what you think is possible. It changes the way you experience every single day. This isn't another method to add to your list of methods. It's a completely different way of understanding reality, time, and even what you really are. And when that understanding clicks, everything else naturally begins to fall into place. Let's start with what your senses tell you. The physical world appears solid, linear, and bound by cause and effect. It seems like everything moves step by step, slowly unfolding into outcomes. But this outer world is not the deepest level of reality. It is more like a reflection, a projection of something far more fundamental. That deeper reality is imagination. Not imagination in the sense of casual daydreaming or fantasy, but as the actual creative ground of existence, the source from which the physical world continuously emerges. William Blake expressed this idea clearly when he said that imagination is the eternal and real world, and what we call the physical universe is only a faint shadow of it. I want you to really consider that, not as poetic language, but as a direct description of how existence is structured. Now, here is a statement that can sound almost too good to accept at first. Everything you desire already exists, not in the sense that you must struggle to build it from nothing, and not as something you have to slowly earn through effort or proving yourself. It already exists as one of countless possible states within what can be called a larger dimensional field of reality. This field contains every possible experience, every version of life, every outcome that could ever unfold. All of it exists at once, not waiting in line to be created step by step, but already present as complete states of being. From this perspective, your role is not to create something out of nothing. Your role is selection. You are not constructing your desire piece by piece. You are choosing it from what already exists and aligning your awareness with it. To make this more real, imagine that every possible version of your life is already fully formed. Not imagined in a casual sense, but existing in the realm where imagination is the primary reality and the physical world is secondary. There is a version of you who has already achieved the success you are working toward. There is a version of you who already has the health you are seeking. There is a version of you already living the relationship you desire. These versions are not being created in the future. They already exist in the eternal present of consciousness. The real question is not whether they exist. The question is, which version are you identifying with right now? Because your experience is shaped by the version you continuously assume yourself to be. Your dominant feeling, your habitual inner state, becomes the filter through which you select your reality. This is where imagination becomes the key mechanism. Not imagination as idle thought, but imagination as an active faculty of awareness that allows you to enter and select among existing states of being. When you imagine your desire as already fulfilled, when you do it with enough clarity that it feels lived in rather than merely pictured, you are not creating something new. You are shifting your awareness to a state that already exists. It is similar to tuning a radio. Every station is already broadcasting, whether you are tuned into it or not. The signal is always there. You don't create the station. You simply adjust your frequency until you receive it clearly. In the same way, your desired reality is already broadcasting. Your imagination is what tunes you to it. When your awareness locks onto that state, you begin to experience its expression in the physical world. This is also why feeling is so important. A mental image without feeling is like being slightly off frequency. You may catch fragments, but not the full signal. It feels incomplete, unstable, unclear. Feeling is what locks in the alignment. When you emotionally and physically feel as though your desire is already true, not forced emotion, but a natural inner certainty, you complete the tuning process. You have shifted states. And once that shift happens, the outer world begins to respond, because the physical world always reorganizes itself around the state consciousness occupies. Now, one question naturally arises for the rational mind when it first encounters this idea. How does time fit into all of this? In everyday experience, time appears to move in a straight line. The future feels as though it has not yet arrived. The present is what is happening now, and the past is fixed behind us, no longer accessible. This sense of sequence feels so undeniable that it is rarely questioned. Yet this linear flow belongs to the world of appearances, the world your senses report and interpret. It is part of the external, effect-based reality. But there is another level beneath it, the realm of imagination, which is the primary reality from which the physical world is derived, does not operate in the same way. In that deeper dimension, reality is not divided into past, present, and future. Instead, everything exists together in a single, unified now, an eternal present that contains all states simultaneously. This is not meant as abstract philosophy. It has a direct and practical implication. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you are not trying to reach a future outcome that will arrive later after time passes. You are shifting right now into a state that already exists within the larger field of consciousness. From the perspective of that deeper reality, your desire is not something pending or incomplete. It is already fulfilled. What we call waiting is simply the lag between inner realization and outer reflection. The physical world does not lead, it follows. It expresses what has already been established within consciousness. This is what is meant by living in the end. It is not about hoping for something to arrive eventually, but about occupying the state as though it is already accomplished, because in the deeper sense of reality, it already is. At this point, it is important to address something that often confuses people who try to apply this teaching and see little or no change. There is a clear and significant difference between wishing for something and actually assuming the feeling of its fulfillment. That difference is not minor. It determines everything. Wishing keeps the desire at a distance. It quietly reinforces the idea that the thing is not here yet. Even when it is emotional or intense, wishing carries an underlying message. This is missing, and I want it. In doing so, it continually reaffirms lack. Living from the end is entirely different. It operates from the inner conviction that it is already done. It does not argue with appearances or deny what the senses currently show, but it refuses to accept them as final truth. Instead, it settles into the inner state of fulfillment, where the desire is no longer a desire, because it has already been realized. If someone has practiced visualization or affirmations without seeing results, it is worth honestly examining what was actually happening internally. Were you seeing the desired outcome while still emotionally anchored in absence? Were you repeating statements while underneath there remained a quiet sense of not yet? If so, that is still the structure of wishing, just expressed in a different form. The correction is not to increase effort within the same pattern. It is to shift the state entirely, to genuinely inhabit the feeling of fulfillment, not as a mental exercise, but as an inner identity. The idea of pray without ceasing, often misunderstood, can be seen in this light. It is not about repeating words endlessly. It is about sustained inner alignment, remaining in the feeling of the fulfilled state throughout the day, not just during moments of focused practice. That continuity of inner state is the real creative act. Between this inner shift and its outer expression, there is always an interval. Sometimes it is short, sometimes it takes longer, but that delay is never evidence that nothing is happening. It is simply the unfolding of what has already been set in motion within consciousness. This is where detachment becomes necessary, and it is important not to misunderstand it. Detachment is not indifference, nor is it a lack of care. It is the absence of anxious observation, the need to constantly check, measure, and look for proof in the external world. That kind of monitoring actually reinforces the very sense of lack you are trying to move beyond. There is an old phrase, be still and know. This stillness is not about doing nothing. It is the kind of quiet confidence that comes after real inner alignment. where you no longer feel the urge to constantly verify or check whether things are working, because you understand that verification is not how this process functions in the first place. Just as you would never dig up a seed every day to see if it is growing, you simply water it and trust the intelligence of the law that governs all growth, both seen and unseen. In the same way, when you deeply accept that your desire has already been received in the dimension where reception actually occurs, the habit of anxious checking naturally dissolves. It is not something you force yourself to stop. It simply stops mattering. And when that happens, your entire inner relationship with desire transforms. What was once longing becomes a steady, unshaken sense of certainty. From that certainty, something profound begins to unfold. You become, in Neville's words, impervious to discouragement. Not because life stops presenting challenges or shifting circumstances, but because those circumstances are no longer mistaken for final truth. They are seen for what they are, surface reflections. And a reflection cannot destabilize someone who is no longer confused about where the source of reality actually is. At this point, a misunderstanding needs to be cleared up. Many people assume this teaching is about passivity, about simply waiting for life to change while doing nothing. That is not what is being described here. Instead, what changes is the nature of action itself. When you truly begin to live from the state of your wish fulfilled, not as a brief mental exercise, but as a sustained inner identity, you will notice that action still happens, but it no longer feels forced or effortful in the way actions born from anxiety do. Instead, it feels natural, timely, and almost guided, as though your next step is being revealed rather than calculated. It becomes less like pushing through resistance and more like moving with an inner intelligence that already sees the path ahead. This is not imagination in a vague sense. It is what happens when your consciousness is no longer split between desire and doubt. This is the deeper meaning behind seeking first the kingdom, prioritizing the inner state above all external striving. When that inner state is established with sincerity and consistency, the appropriate actions tend to emerge without strain, often at precisely the right moment, requiring far less effort than anything driven from lack ever could. Another question naturally arises for anyone engaging with this idea sincerely. What about situations where your desire overlaps with someone else's? Does your fulfillment come at another person's expense? This concern is important because it quietly limits many people's imagination without them even realizing it. They hold back, afraid that wanting something strongly might somehow take away from someone else. But that hesitation is rooted in a misunderstanding of how reality operates at its deepest level. In the larger dimension of reality, the field of pure possibility from which all experiences are drawn, there is no scarcity, no fixed amount of good distributed in competition. Scarcity exists only in the physical world of appearances, where things seem limited and separate. But the source itself is not limited. From that source, every genuine possibility already exists in fullness. One person's realization does not produce or interfere with another's. You are not competing for a finite supply of outcomes. You are selecting your experience from an infinite field of potential states. When you assume the state of your fulfilled desire, you are simply aligning with one expression within that field. Nothing is taken from anyone else. Nothing is diminished in the process. Understanding this removes a deep layer of hesitation that keeps many people from imagining freely. The fear of wanting too much, or the idea that desire must be restrained out of moral caution, begins to dissolve. That restraint is not necessary. You are free to imagine fully, clearly, and without apology. The field you are drawing from has no limit, no boundary, and no depletion. And beneath all the specific things a person may be seeking, whether money, relationship, opportunity, health, or change, there is something even more fundamental, quietly waiting to be understood. Because when that is understood, it often reorganizes everything else at its root. The principle of assumption is not limited to external outcomes or specific life events. It applies just as deeply to inner states of being, the way you experience life itself, independent of circumstances. If what you truly seek is not a particular outcome, but a different quality of inner experience, more peace, more joy, a deeper and more stable sense of love, then the same principle works in exactly the same way. You begin by assuming the feeling of being that way, not hoping for peace, but living from the feeling of being peaceful, not waiting for joy, but entering the state of being someone in whom joy is natural and present, not trying to force love into existence, but identifying with the inner state of someone for whom love flows easily and continuously. When you persist in these assumed states, something subtle but profound begins to happen. The outer world does not need to change first. Instead, the way you interpret and experience everything begins to shift. The same circumstances that once felt heavy or uncertain start to feel different, not because they have immediately transformed, but because the inner lens through which they are seen has changed. There is another important shift that often follows this. As you move from a state of wanting into a state of being, away from anxiety and lack, and into settled inner fulfillment, you will often notice that the specific things you once desired begin to show up in your life. But when they do, they no longer carry the same emotional urgency they once had. They feel more like natural byproducts than desperate goals. This is not disappointment. It is actually a sign of alignment with something deeper than the individual desire itself. You have touched the source from which all specific desires emerge. And from that level, the individual outcomes no longer feel like survival needs, but like natural expressions of something already complete within you. I want to bring this to its deepest point because the effectiveness of everything described here depends on this understanding. When it is said that everything you want is already available, this is not just a poetic way of speaking about faster results. It is pointing to a more fundamental realization that in your essential nature, nothing is missing. The kingdom, as the old teaching expresses it, is within you. This is not metaphorical comfort. It is a direct statement about where reality is sourced and experienced. What you call wealth, love, health, or peace is not something separated from you, located somewhere outside, waiting to be obtained. It exists as potential within the same consciousness that is reading these words right now. Your task has never been to move toward those things across some external distance. It has been to recognize them inwardly and align with them through assumption and feeling, to select them within awareness rather than chase them in the world of effects. When this becomes not just an idea, but a stable way of seeing, your entire relationship with desire changes. Desire is no longer rooted in lack. It becomes an expression of an already recognized fullness. Like a fountain that does not worry about running dry, consciousness no longer calculates what it is allowed to have or become. This is the real shift being pointed to here. Not simply that things will begin to appear in your life, though they often do, but that you come to recognize in a steady and grounded way that what you have been seeking has always been rooted in your own being. From that recognition,
desire itself changes its nature. It is no longer a quiet admission of incompleteness. It becomes a natural movement of creativity within a consciousness that understands itself as the source rather than the seeker. So you continue forward from that awareness, not anxiously reaching outward, but quietly resting in what is already true at the level that matters most. You persist in that inner state while the outer world adjusts in its own time to reflect what has already been established within. And gradually, with a calm sense of clarity rather than effort, life begins to mirror back what was already present in consciousness all along. What you are looking for is not far away. It is not on its way from somewhere distant. It is already present in the only place it has ever truly existed, in your own awareness, waiting only to be recognized.